So, Michael, have at it. We're going to do opening statements of 3 minutes a pop, and I will be very vigorous in policing it.
Good. Well, our position on the question is obviously depends on how you define it. If there really is a God, then obviously he probably or she has a future. If there is no God, then we're only really talking about the future of belief in God. Belief in belief or something like that. So my position is I don't believe in God. Obviously I can't prove a negative, that there is none. On the other hand, I think as the circle of what science explains grows, more and more of the things that God used to explain are now explained through natural forces. So the expansion of naturalism as a way of explaining things has continued fairly aggressively for 4 centuries, and I think will continue to for many more centuries, and such that we'll be left with the question is what is there left for God to do? And so I think just 2 points on that is that, one, although I can't prove a negative, I can demonstrate fairly conclusively, I think, that belief in God and the kind of gods you believe in and the sorts of religions you adhere to depend very much on where you happen to have been born and in which century you happen to have been born. So if you were born 10,000 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years from now, is very much going to shape what particular God you believe in. And so that alone tells us that there's a strong cultural component and historical component to just the concept of God. And there's nothing particularly unusual about creation myths. All cultures have them. There's nothing, then there's something. Or else it wouldn't be a creation story, would it? And most cultures have flood myths, especially cultures that are on bodies of water that flood. Lots of cultures have resurrection stories and virgin birth stories. Dionysus, a Greek god of wine, converted water into wine, drank the body and blood of the creator of the universe, and Osiris, the Egyptian god, way predating Judeo-Christian gods, had a kind of a resurrection and savior story, such that first, if the pharaoh believes in Osiris, he gets everlasting life. Then the pharaohs figured out you can employ people to build pyramids much better if you give them the promise of the afterlife also, and that expanded into basically accepting a savior type person to achieve everlasting life. So we see that happening everywhere we go. And then the second point, just to wrap it up, is that what we know from neuroscience is that we do tend to look at the world and find meaningful patterns and impose on those patterns intentional agency. And so the intentional agents are things like ghosts and gods and demons and angels and aliens and so forth. And God is another version of that. It's a projection of what our brain is doing to try to understand and make sense of the world. And all of that together, I think, is a strong several lines of evidence to show us that we created God and not vice versa.
Very different kinds of conversations we could have here. We can talk about religion as it is, for most people most of the time. And we can talk about what religion could be, or should be, or perhaps what it is for the tiniest minority of people. And I just want you to be aware of the difference there, because it could get lost. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. And he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence? Which is to say, on faith. And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God. So we can talk about anything we want. I'm happy to talk about consciousness. But please notice that when we migrate away from the God that is really shaping human events, or the God talk that is really shaping human events in our world at this moment.
You have been, let's just say, dismissive of what Deepak has said thus far about the notion that there is something more than this. How can you be so sure that there isn't? And I know it's hard to prove a negative, if not impossible. But what? Give me some evidence to support your contention that this is it.
Well, for example, I can't prove that there isn't something else that I don't know that there isn't. Huh? I mean, it's like the difference between something invisible and something non-existent. Well, it's zero and we can't study it. But if you take something specific like Gene's excellent comment there, we actually have a pretty good scientific understanding now based on evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology that if you expand the circle of sentiments to include other people as honorary members of your tribe, you're less likely to kill them. And so, like, for example, tried and true game theory kind of data in the real world of opening up economic borders, you're less likely to bomb countries that make your cars and computers. That's a form of trade that makes you feel like somebody else is an honorary member of your tribe. Well, that has very deep evolutionary reasons that we've now come to understand in just the last few decades by applying the methods of science to something with a real social consequences. And we can derive that from data and tests and game theory models and so forth. So just in terms of what we can operationally define carefully so that we're all talking about the same thing and then go measure it or test it or experiment with it or try it. I mean, one of the great things about democracy, liberal democracy, it's kind of a scientific experiment. Let's try this, let's try that. This state has this taxation system, this one has that taxation system. It's like an experiment. And so I think what you described, Gene, as the expanding circle of sentiments to include women is a result of the Enlightenment experiment that let's try that. Let's see if that produces greater prosperity and wealth and happiness and joy for more people in more places, and it worked. And that's a rational, reasonable approach.
One thing I'd like to add to that is I think it's ironic to score women's rights for your side of the ledger here in this conversation, because there's been no greater obstacle to empowering women in human history than religion. Certainly the three monotheists. I mean, when you...
Sam, to my ear at least, neither Gene nor Deepak is advocating religion as you understand it.
That's true, and that's why I said what I said at the beginning. That the issue here, I mean, what kind of conversation should we have, and how will this conversation be construed by people in the audience, by people seeing this on television? And the reality is that the kind of talk and the kind of invocations of science that Deepak is offering here is received by a great number of people who believe a lot of unjustified, very myth-laden stuff that has been handed down to us.
You're making that statement without qualifying without giving any proof of it. Give me some proof that what I'm saying is what he says is woo-woo, just because he can't understand it.
Okay.
You know, every discipline has its vocabulary.
It's okay. If you're going to say that non-locality is an operable principle in neuroscience. That is woo-woo right now in neuroscience.
It's a principle in morphogenesis and differentiation. It's a principle in the workings of the pacemaker of your heart, where 100 pacemaker cells fire simultaneously, non-locally.
Saying it louder and relentlessly is not going to make it true.